Hi everyone, welcome to this video. This video is going to look at a sociological topic and we're going to look at theoretical perspectives, in this case the Marxist perspective, and we're going to apply that to education. So before we start, anytime you get a 20 or 30 mark question in the AQA specification or you're asked about Marxism, you're probably going to have to reference functionalism and the functionalist perspective on education to provide your critique. Now, there is a second video coming to this channel that will cover the functionalist perspective of education, but for now I just thought I'd run through some key points. So the functionalist, or the father of functionalism, Emil Durkheim, he argued or said that the education system has two primary functions. The first is the transmission of society's norms and values, so secondary socialization. And he said the second is the education system reinforces social solidarity or a sense of community amongst young people. Now, Durkheim's argument for this was that he argued that society needs social solidarity, as individuals must feel themselves to be part of a larger social body or community. And then we have our final theorists, which are Kingsley Davis and Wilbert Moore from 1945, and they argue that in a capitalist society, inequality is necessary. And a Marxist take on that would be that actually that may not be true. And the education system, one of its roles, according to the Marxist perspective, is that it is actually there to reinforce equality and normalise it to the point that we don't question it. Now, Talcott Parsons argued that the school also helps young people transition from what are called particularistic standards and ascribed standards of the household to universalistic standards and achieve status of the workplace. What that means is that at home, when we are with our parents or our carers or the adults we live with, we generally may receive praise and our status is given to us without having to do anything. But in the working world or in society at large, that's not how the world works. We have to earn that status, and we earn our our status in society and our salary and those type of things. And the functionalists argue that school acts as a bridge between the family, i.e. primary socialization, and through the process of secondary socialization we are prepared for the workforce. So we have a 30 mark question on screen, and this is from the AQA specification, so I'm just going to read that and use this to frame our analysis. So item A, sociologists see the education system as performing a vital role in modern societies. While a family can provide young people with the basic values and some useful practical skills, it cannot equip individuals with everything they need in order to become fully functioning members of a larger scale society. In modern economies, with a highly complex division of labour, only the education system can equip individuals with the specialised knowledge and skill they will need when they join the workforce. Furthermore, the education system not only provides young people with the necessary training, it also selects and allocates them to their future work roles. So those two paragraphs so far are quite explicitly from the functionalist perspective, and they're laying out some of the key arguments the functionalist the functionalist perspective. And then we have a final paragraph which says, however, while many sociologists agree that education plays a vital economic role in today's society, they disagree about whether this is done on the basis of an individual's abilities and efforts and about who benefits as a result. So that last paragraph just hints at what the examiners want you to talk about is another theoretical perspective, and they want you to use that perspective to critique the functional perspective that has been presented. Now, when we're talking about education and functionalism, Marxism is the natural counterpoint. So that's why I've chosen this question for this lesson. So the question says, applying material from item A and your knowledge, evaluate the view that the education system exists mainly to select and prepare people for future work roles. So a quick point about one of the main differences or fundamental difference between the two perspectives is the functionalist theorists argue or see society and education as based on a value consensus. And the Marxist theorists disagree, and they view society and education as based on class division and class exploitation. So all of their thoughts and perspectives on education stem from these two sentences, basically, and that's what we're going to do that's what we're going to explore in these videos. So Karl Marx then, describes the capital system as being a two-class system. And he says the system is made up of two distinct classes. So we have the capitalist class, who are the minority. They're also known as the bourgeoisie. And they're the employers who own the means of production, so land, factories, machineries, offices, etc. What you should be thinking about is Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. They are people we consider bourgeoisie, a capitalist class in the modern sense. And they make their profits by exploiting the labour of the majority, their workforce, who are the proletariat or the working class. So to get a better understanding of the potential conflict that is caused or created between these two classes is definitely worth Googling Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Union Busters, and that'll give you a good, clear picture of how the capitalist and bourgeoisie classes can treat the working class. So the proletariat are forced to sell their labour power to the capitalists since they own no means of production of their own, so they have no other source of income, and as a result, working under capitalism is poorly paid, alienating, unsatisfying, and something over which workers have no real control. So when it comes to education, the Marxist theorists argue that the education system is geared towards one thing, and that is maintaining the system you see on screen and normalising inequality and exploitation of the working class by the bourgeoisie. So Karl Marx describes or identifies a potential problem. He says within a capitalist society, and we have these class divisions, there is always the potential for class conflict. And class conflict are political tensions and economic antagonism that exist in society between the rich and the poor. However, Marxist theorists also point out that the education system has been designed in such a way that it just basically teaches bourgeoisie ideology and represses or suppresses proletariat, working class culture and ideologies, and our exploitation as the working class or the proletariat is normalised and even justified through the education system. So when we enter the workforce, we don't really question it, and that prevents class conflict. So as it says on screen, Marx believed that ultimately the proletariat would unite to overthrow the capitalist system and create a classless, equal society. And Marx and the theorists would argue that the education system is playing a big role in this, but the functionalists would argue something quite different. And they say that the education system does not actually reinforce inequality, that inequality is necessary, and through the education system we are selected, or our roles are allocated to us after we leave school, or our roles in wider society are allocated to us. And they focus more on the relationship between education and social inequality. But Marxists argue that because the bourgeoisie control the state and therefore the education system, they would say the function of the education system is a means of preventing revolution and maintaining capitalism, and it does this by assigning roles and reinforcing inequality. So one of the key arguments from the functionalist perspective is that the education system is meritocratic. So it's a level playing field, basically, is that all students, when they enter the education system, start at zero. And then it's up to them to show their ability and their own hard-working will, and it's a natural ability, and that's what gives them their, status and gets them assigned a better role in society. However, Marxists do not believe the education system is meritocratic, and they call this argument the myth of meritocracy. So the Marxists believe that the education system benefits the bourgeoisie and ensures that the children of working class people underachieve. In other words, wealthy children do better than poor children in the education system. And we see examples of that all across our society. I mean, if you look at the current sitting government in Britain, most of the Tory MPs and those sitting on the bench would have gone to a private school, Eton, and then went to Cambridge or the Oxford universities or a very wealthy education establishment, whereas working class children are much less likely to be given those opportunities, and therefore they can't access those higher echelons of society. So in that sense, we can argue the education system does in fact reproduce inequality, and meritocracy is a myth. So on screen we've got some arguments in support of and against this argument of meritocracy. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you want to look at the arguments in support of meritocracy and then the arguments that actually criticise the idea and support the arguments that meritocracy is a myth, you can pause the screen now and have a quick look. Okay, so a key theorist is Louis Althusser. Now, Marxists see the state as the means by which the capitalist ruling class, the bourgeoisie, maintain their domination of society. According to Althusser, the state uses what he calls the ideological state apparatus to maintain their control of society. So the ideological state apparatus, or the ISA, they maintain the rule of the bourgeoisie by controlling people's ideas, values and beliefs. Now, ideological state apparatus, that includes things like religion, media, government, and also the education system. And he argues that the education system is used to reinforce inequality. And it does that by teaching bourgeoisie ideology and suppressing all other ideologies. So Althusser went on to say the ideological state apparatus of education has two primary functions. So one, reproduces class inequality by transmitting it from generation to generation. By failing each successive generation of working class pupils, schools teach the ideologies of the bourgeoisie. So if you think about the type of subjects and the content that you study at your GCSE or A level, if it's subjects like history and English, etc., if you really break those down and consider the ideological nature of those texts, they are quite they do stem from bourgeoisie culture. We learn about the royal family, we learn about the class system in Britain, and it is very much a bourgeois ideology that is promoted to us. We very rarely learn about working class culture. And secondly, Althusser argued that education legitimizes class inequality by producing ideologies that disguise its true cause. The function of ideology is to persuade workers to accept that inequality is inevitable and that they deserve their subordinate position in society. So we are taught that the capitalist and bourgeoisie ideologies, they are the natural way, so we accept them and we won't try and overthrow them. Now Bowles and Ginnett build upon this idea, and they argue that actually the education system has a further two functions: is to produce the next generation of labour power, i.e. to produce workers or labourers or proletariat, and secondly to legitimise inequality. Bowles and Ginnett argue that the capitalist system requires a workforce with the attitudes, behaviour and personality types suited to their roles as alienated and exploited workers willing to accept hard work. They say that there is a similarity between what takes place in school and what takes place in the workplace, and they call this the correspondence principle. Now, the correspondence principle operates through what functionalists call the hidden curriculum. So we know what the visible curriculum is. That is the subjects that we are studying. That is our sociology A level. They're the things that we teach explicitly or we learn about explicitly in class that we're examined on, and that is known as the curriculum. But within schools, there's also a hidden curriculum. So they're the unwritten rules, values, and normative patterns of behaviour which students are expected to conform to and learn whilst in school. So, for example, it's not part of an A-level course, or it's not a requirement in terms of what the exam board wants from the students to be on time, to be respectful for teachers, to do your homework on time. They're the things that there's no real assessment for, but they are taught and reinforced in schools. And how the hidden curriculum works and how the corresponding principle works is that, for example, if you turn up late to a lesson, your teacher may shout or have a go or dole out some form of punishment. Now, the Marxist perspective is arguing that actually what that is doing is not actually really beneficial to the students in any meaningful way, other than to teach them how society works, to make them fit into the capital system. So they will learn that if they are late or they do not perform to their maximum, they will face some sort of punishment. And by the time we get to the workforce and society at large, we are sort of conditioned to accept inequality, basically, and accept that our bosses can talk to us poorly or treat us unfairly. So ultimately, what Bowles and Ginnett argue is that schools produce docile and obedient workers motivated by extrinsic factors. So extrinsic factors means like external to us, so material goods and possessions. The schools produce workers who accept hierarchy and authority. One of the things we're told all the time in school is that we should respect our elders and we should pay respect to those who have more knowledge and things like that. But actually, that's an ideological view of the world. That we are being taught an ideological view, and that is very much the bourgeoisie ideology, with the idea being that we won't question our bourgeoisie capitalist bosses in the future. We'll just accept what they say and go along with it and continue to be exploited and not fight for our rights and stand up for ourselves. And schools also produce a fragmented workforce who are used to routine and separate tasks. So we have individual lessons, we have tasks in the lesson, and that is basically preparing us for small, fragmented labour in the future. Okay, and then our final theorist for this video is Paul Willis and his seminal study, Learning to Labour. So whereas Bowles and Ginnett see education as a straightforward process of indoctrination into the myth of meritocracy, Willis shows that working class pupils can resist such attempts to indoctrinate them. And we're going to look now at some of his key findings. Okay. Oops. So Willis observed a group of students in the 1970s in schools and looked at how certain working class students in particular, working class male students, how they acted in school and how they actually prepared themselves for work. So the main conclusions of Willis's study was that boys actively failed themselves and they sabotaged the educational experience themselves. They said the boys created a counter school culture. The culture created by the boys prepared them for the shop floor culture of the factory. And this research supports Bowles and Ginnett's claim that there is a correspondence principle between work and school. So what he's talking about in a nutshell is maybe working class male students may not, they may have been failed by the education system by the time they get to, say, GCSE or A level, and they don't have the academic equipment necessary to achieve at that level, and that may make them feel quite insecure, isolated. So what they will do is that they will try and get their sort of cultural capital, if you like, or their sort of worth from somewhere else, and that could be from playing the class clown. It could be from actively breaking rules and being anti-authoritarian. And Willis argues that that mentality and that sort of way of looking at the world transmits from school into the workplace. And so again, it supports the idea of correspondence principle. So this ultimately explains how working class kids get working class jobs, and the education system reinforces this inequality. So in the introduction to a study, he conducted qualitative research into the educational careers of 12 non-conforming boys. The research took place during the last 1.5 years of school and the first few months of their employment. So he actively tracked the correspondence principle from one environment to the next. And his methodology, he used qualitative methods, including observation of the boys during lessons, unstructured group interviews with them, and diaries written by the boys. And what Willis found was that his work was based on the Marxist idea of education, and he was interested to see whether the education system held back working class children like Bowles and Ginnett suggested. And Willis found that although working class children are less likely to succeed in education, it is not entirely the fault of the education system or the schools. Willis believed that the lads themselves chose to reject the values and rules upheld by the school and the teachers. They adopted a counter-school culture or anti-school culture, and this was developed as a result of the lads' backgrounds, upbringing and culture. As the people around them, including their fathers, had manual working class jobs, the boys believed that they knew what their future would be. The formal education system therefore seemed irrelevant to them. They were destined to achieve low status, low paid jobs, so why bother to work hard? So if young working class boys only see maybe low paid or what are usually identified as low skilled jobs, and that's how those jobs are sort of classed. Whether they are low skilled or not is another question. But if that is all young working class boys see, they will start to develop the idea that that's their future and that is all that is available to them. So the school system is not actually going to benefit them in any way moving into those industries. So as it says on screen, why bother to work hard? So the school wasn't preparing boys for working class jobs, but because of this counter school culture they had developed, the lads were preparing themselves for manual work, and he called this the shop floor culture. And he followed the lads into he said this developed into a shop floor culture from a school culture. So Willis followed the lads into their first job and noted a number of similarities between the way they had behaved in school and the culture of the workplace. Having a laugh was just as important as a means of dealing with the monotony of boredom. Our friends were also important in order to create an us and them situation. Okay. So that's just a quick overview of the key theorists and their key arguments of the Marxist perspective of education. So I'm just going to let the video play now, and there are some sample questions on screen, and some of the questions have been broken down to show you how to approach the questions, how to use the item, and how to start planning and then writing your response. If any teachers watch this would like to download the lessons themselves, there's a link to my TED store in the description below.